So, let's talk about some Star Wars.
There's nothing more important than knowing where you're going. And there are projects that I've worked on where we had some ideas, but we hadn't worked through them enough. We had sometimes we had some ideas, but then we weren't allowed to do them the way we wanted to. We had, I've had all sorts of situations where you plan things in a certain way, and you suddenly find yourself doing something that's 180 degrees different. And then sometimes it works really well, and you feel like, wow, that really came together. And other times you think, oh my God, I can't believe this is where we are. And sometimes when it's not working out, it's because it's what you planned. And other times when it's not working out, it's because it didn't. It's like you never really know. But having a plan, I have learned in some cases the hard way, is the most critical thing, because otherwise you don't know what you're setting up. You don't know what what to emphasize, because if you don't know the inevitable of the story, you're just as good as your last sequence or effect or joke or whatever, but you want to be leading to something inevitable.
J.J. Abrams did an interview where he talked about the sequel trilogy, and the reaction from a lot of Star Wars fans have been divisive, like it always is these days when anyone talks about the sequel trilogy to begin with. It's pretty clear JJ didn't want the sequels to end up the way they ended up. And honestly, even though I'm not a fan of The Last Jedi and have my complaints with Duel of the Fates and The Rise of Skywalker, I'm sure no one from Colin Trevorrow to Rian Johnson intended for the reception of the sequel trilogy to be an endless bloodlust war between fans until the sun envelops us all and kills every single living thing in the entire spectrum of reality. At least I hope so. And like I always say, if you love the sequel trilogy, regardless of if it's just one movie or all of the movies,
cheers, I'll drink to that, bro.
So this brings me to the point of reflection though, looking back at the sequel trilogy and wondering, how the hell did we get here?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
They looked at the stories and they said, we want to make something for the fans. So I said, all I wanted to do was tell a story of what happened. It started here and it went there, and it's all about generations, and it's about, the issues of fathers and sons and grandfathers, and it's a family soap opera. Ultimately, we call it space opera, but people don't realize it's actually a soap opera, and it's all about family problems and it's not about spaceships. So they decided they didn't want to use those stories. They decided they were going to go do their own thing, and so I decided, fine, but basically, I'm not going to try to, they weren't that keen to have me involved anyway, but at the same time I said, I'm not going to, if I get in there, I'm just going to cause trouble, because they're not going to do what I want them to do, so, and I don't have the control to do that anymore, and all I would do is muck everything up. So I said, okay, I will go my way and I'll let them go their way.
First, we had George Lucas and his treatments, which he was going to turn into scripts for the sequel trilogy with Michael Arnott, till Disney and George had a falling out before JJ, Ryan, and Colin were even hired. Though of course, when things are announced versus when they actually happen are two entirely different things that we, the public, will never know. Non-disclosure agreements and all that being a thing.
How many other lies have I been told by the council?
This habit of basically reusing concepts is something at first I blamed on Lucasfilm, but I can't even ignore Disney's habit of remaking everything and rewriting history. If you look at Disney's recent track record of remaking and reimagining their own catalog of animated films into live-action stories, it's not hard to imagine their mission statement for the sequel trilogy was repackage and resell.
We're like NBA 2K, we just copy and paste. We don't really change much, okay? But
Choke me like you hate me, but you love me low-key. Wanna date me when you fuck me.
And again, no shade, it's just kind of a visible strategy they use for all their movies these days that aren't associated with Pixar or the MCU. Which, looking back at the sequel trilogy movies, it is clear that all of them, yes, all of them, including The Last Jedi, borrow visual and narrative beats from the original trilogy.
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
Arnott did not work on a proper script about Luke, Han, and Leia's kids. Rather, Arnott was first hired to write a long treatment based on George Lucas's story ideas, then a script with him. That story was dumped shortly after the buyout was announced and George Lucas walked. From then on, Arnott was tasked with writing something completely different. He began in November 2012 and he worked on this story for 9 months. Approximately 1 year after the buyout, Arnott told Lucasfilm that he needed 18 more months to finish the script for episode 7. That was way too much time for a movie Disney wanted in theaters in 2015.
Okay, so we finally have a release date. Star Wars Episode 7 will be hitting theaters on December 18th, 2015. But for a moment there, we were all a little worried about Star Wars. Oscar winner and Hunger Games Catching Fire screenwriter Michael Arndt bowed out of the project, leaving J.J. Abrams and co-writer Lawrence Kasdan to finish the script for the film, which apparently isn't even completed yet. And even though 2015 seems like a reasonable amount of time to make a movie, a year and a half flies by, especially when you're trying to make one of the biggest movies in Hollywood. Abrams and Lucasfilm head Kathleen Kennedy wanted to push the release date to 2016, but Disney wouldn't budge and settled with them on a very late 2015 release date. Now, when Abrams was asked about having to jump on board to co-write the script, he basically said that the decision was because they were working with such a short timeline. He said, quote, "It became clear that given the time frame and given the process and the way the thing was going, that working with Larry in this way was going to get us where we need to be and when we needed to be." The Larry he is referring to is, of course, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi writer Lawrence Kasdan.
In enters J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan. Sets, costumes, and visual effects were already being prepared, all based around Arnott's story that he had worked on with the story group. J.J. and Kasdan drafted the third act of Michael Arnott's uncompleted script, then went back and rewrote the rest, tweaking character motivations, rewriting dialogue, etc. That being said, any changes they made couldn't be too liberal, and Lucasfilm still had to have input into everything they did. So things like the Resistance, Starkiller Base, Luke's temple getting burned, and Han and Leia being broken up really couldn't be changed at that point in time, because again, pre-production was already starting for Episode 7. Lawrence and JJ initially wanted to start from scratch, but there was just no time. And that's a phrase I want you to remember as this video goes on. No time. Specifically, Disney giving their directors and writers no time, which if you're a fan of Solo or Star Wars Story,
I ain't felt like this in a long time.
You'll remember the troubled production and how instead of pushing back the release of the film till December, Disney was insistent that it kept its May release date, even though most of the film had to be reshot with an entirely new director after the original directors were let go, and Ron Howard had come in to replace them. Then there was the impression that JJ was going to do the entire sequel trilogy himself, but that notion was debunked with the announcement that Rian Johnson and Colin Trevorrow would be helming the next two sequels to The Force Awakens respectively. And it's understandable why JJ didn't want to helm the sequel trilogy himself. Disney wanted these films out way too quickly for one director to do, especially when that one director was producing a handful of other projects unrelated to Star Wars and had a contract with Paramount Pictures, a contract that would literally take $10 million to free up JJ to do Episode 9 after Colin parted ways with the production. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
But wait! There's more!
Rian Johnson writes his own movie before even meeting JJ, and when the two do get in touch, Rian is requesting things to be changed from The Force Awakens so it fits with The Last Jedi. Some things JJ says yes on, others according to JJ, he says no. JJ leaves behind an outline, the outline is thrown out. Then we have The Last Jedi, and love or hate that movie, that's not what we're here to discuss. From the way Rian talks, and Daisy saying that JJ's outline was thrown out, whatever JJ wanted from the sequel trilogy, it seems Lucasfilm didn't want that. And that's no shade against anyone, studios do that from time to time, though it is very rare for a studio to do that when the first film of a trilogy was very successful. Well, successful at least by the audience and critical reception, as well as The Force Awakens being the highest grossing film of all time in North America to this day. But things happen. Yet, this is where problems initially came from, because once you introduce a different narrative, a different vision, especially when the original vision was favored by many people, you create a dilemma where some of your audience members will start preferring one vision over the other. This is what did happen, because J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson are very two different filmmakers with their own very unique styles. Now, things get even more complicated when Episode 9 director Colin Trevorrow and co-writer Derek Connolly part ways with Lucasfilm after several rewrites of Duel of the Fates. The last draft Colin and Derek worked on was leaked to the public eventually, but the draft of Duel of the Fates that Jack Thorne worked on after Colin's departure has not leaked yet, at least publicly. The big problem with Colin's departure is that just as JJ was setting things up for the sequel trilogy with The Force Awakens in his outline, which were thrown out, Ryan and Colin have been working with each other, and not just in the films. If you look at the EU, which was already a mess due to all the retcons they had to do from the transitionary period from the EU that was set up in the Force Awakens era to the Last Jedi era, it became even more of a mess post The Last Jedi, because Duel of the Fates was supposed to be the next film, and much of the EU reflected that, and later that EU became pretty worthless due to the fact that Duel of the Fates wasn't getting made. Finally, we reached The Rise of Skywalker with returning director J.J. Abrams and co-writer Chris Terrio. It's at this point even the actors like Kerry Russell are expressing fears that the story would be changed before reshoots for The Rise of Skywalker even started.
I feel like he embraces it and knows how to do it so well. He's not trying to change it to be something else, or he really respects what it is what I'm trying to say. And I just think he has a lot of heart. And when I read his script that he wrote, I cried. I mean, who knows what it will turn out to be, and I hope it remained true to what he originally wanted.
How could this happen to me? I made my mistakes.
And this fear related to a giant fandom fear as well. No one knew what the story of Episode 9 was going to be about. There were talks from Mark Hamill about different scripts being flown out to him and then later taken away and replaced. Chris Terrio had stated that he rewrote the film more than any other script in his entire career. Reddit leakers began spelling the entire story months in advance, which made it seem like The Rise of Skywalker was constantly being rewritten, which according to Chris Terrio, it actually was. And I'm not here to point any fingers at any one director or producer. This seems like it was just a problem Disney Lucasfilm had since parting ways with George Lucas. They announce something, they change it, they rush it, change it some more, then ignore it so they pick it up again years later. And as much as this seems like a crazy conspiracy thing, this is honestly just how the film industry goes for a lot of major studios. From Warner Brothers to Sony to Disney Lucasfilm itself. The MCU is a very rare, different animal, honestly because of Kevin Feige. Love or hate the MCU movies, Kevin knows how to run a tight ship production-wise, and Disney gives him a lot of trust to do what he wants to do. The MCU has been going on since 2008. Disney Lucasfilm only started pushing out films by 2015. By all reports, they needed Bad Robot to get the job done in the small time frame Disney gave them due to being so new. Like I said earlier in the video, time is a key factor in all of this. Time is something Disney never gave these films. Disney never took the time to think about if parting ways with George Lucas and his treatments was a good idea, if disregarding JJ's outline, having Ryan write a middle movie before even meeting JJ, allowing Colin to part ways with Lucasfilm even though it was his story that The Last Jedi was leading into, or constantly forcing changes or roadblocking JJ's plans in The Rise of Skywalker was a good idea. At the time of me writing this, it's rather unknown what happened with the production of The Rise of Skywalker. There were studio demands to bring back dead villains. There were fandom demands all over the place for redemptions, trio dynamics, and concepts that weren't properly developed already. Multiple rewrites, reshoots, no deleted scenes, no director's commentary, and a complete 180 from the cast after the reshoots were over and an early screening was shown to them. So that leads us to where we are now. Looking back at the sequel trilogy, and as much as certain parties in the fandom would like to make this a witch hunt, if you follow the production of the sequel trilogy from the beginning till now, there really is no boogeyman making everything bad. At least not publicly, you never know what happens behind closed doors.
Who the devil are you?
What we have is a lot of people with a lot of different intentions, ideas, and even some stories, but no commitment to one vision, one plan. We have George Lucas and his treatments, and it's unknown how these treatments would have turned out after they were turned into scripts. And considering there's a lot of different stories and narratives about what was going to happen, I'm just going to leave links in the description of what people have reported, and you guys can tell me what you think, because I'd rather avoid that argument. We have J.J. Abrams with his setup in The Force Awakens and his outline, which was thrown out, and the only thing we know about what JJ wanted is that Mark Hamill, Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and Adam Driver were on board with this and knew from the start what JJ was going to do.
In the documentary, you were very vocal on your distaste for Mr. Johnson's take on your character Luke. And
It wasn't, no, it's not distaste at all.
Okay.
It's just a Luke that I didn't really understand. I mean, obviously, a lot's happened between, but I had to, like I say, make up backstories that, besides picking, you know, thinking that Kylo Ren, you know, picking the new Hitler to
Right.
be the next hope, that's on me. But there had to be more to me to justify even cutting off my telepathic communication with my sister. So, I mean, but that's my job. I mean, I'm not the one that, and there were practical things because JJ had a much different vision for what was going to happen in 8. The first thing I said to Ryan is, I said, how are we going to explain me being in my Jedi ceremonial robes when I first meet Rey? You know, things like that to make sure that, you know, there was a flow.
The thing that JJ said to me when we first met, first meeting the first time, was that I imagine a journey of a character where it's almost the opposite, just isolating the original trilogy. That the journey of someone who, the opposite of Vader, where Vader starts the most confident, the most experienced, and over the course of 3 films, is chipped away till he's his most vulnerable. And he had the idea of starting someone at that place and doing almost the exact opposite. At the start of the 3rd movie, I didn't know at that point how the 3rd movie ended, but someone who almost starts the most vulnerable and the most susceptible and kind of gradually becomes more and more hardened with experience he's had, gets deeper and deeper into the dark side.
And it's debatable if that was going to be good or bad, but at the very least it would have been consistent to what JJ already set up. In regards to Mark Hamill, who signed on to the sequel trilogy when George Lucas was still going to be doing the entire thing, and John Boyega, who signed on to the sequel trilogy when JJ Abrams made The Force Awakens and left his outline, it seems like the sequel trilogy did not turn out the way they originally intended to from when they started, which is just something that happens when it comes to studios and contracts, like when Patty Jenkins parted ways with the MCU and exited Thor 2, even though everything she was setting up for the story is what Chris Hemsworth, Natalie Portman, and all the other stars were aware of when they signed on to do that movie. But again, contracts and studios, this is what happens. We have Rian Johnson with his middle chapter, The Last Jedi, which compared to everyone else, Rian was lucky enough to get the most time with crafting his film. And as much as people like to say Rian wrote his story in stone and JJ just didn't commit to anything, Rian himself said that everything was still ambiguous for his film and up to the director of 9 to decide, which as we know was going to be Colin, who had been working with Rian during the production of The Last Jedi. We have Colin's ending chapter with Duel of the Fates that I have many mixed feelings on, but aesthetically I like it. But aesthetically I like a lot of concept art from The Rise of Skywalker, and most of that doesn't even reflect the final product, and it's not even in the art book. Fun fact, there is this concept art from The Rise of Skywalker of a mysterious lightsaber wielding character that isn't Kylo or Rey floating around the internet, and as of recently the art was edited to remove the lightsaber and replace it with a blaster. And I'm not trying to make a conspiracy theory here, but I don't know really much concept art that randomly gets edited for a film that was released over a year ago. Finally, we have The Rise of Skywalker, a film that seems to have been everything at one point, and I can't help but feel bad for JJ, who seems to be getting the most blame, because it's easier to blame one director than just reflect on Disney that rushed every aspect of this trilogy, and another studio that struggled to commit to an idea within the chaos of being rushed to death by Disney. Also rather strange that so many people are going to bat for Disney. Guys, I know we all consume Disney products and there's literally no way to escape from them, but it's Disney. They really don't have the moral high ground most of the time, and you know, they're really not someone to go to bat for. I'm just saying. That's just me though. If you look back at this trilogy, from when Iger said they would be adapting George Lucas's stories to where we are now, you have a lot of people who said planning didn't matter. You shouldn't be coming into these films with expectations, but almost everyone accepts that this way of thinking about these films was a giant mistake, especially considering the only expectation many people had was that they would be competently made and make sense together. Like I said, if you love these movies in spite of the troubled productions, more power to you. I'm happy you're happy about these films. This isn't a video to rain on anyone's parade, but as I'm sitting here reflecting on a trilogy that struggled to define its own story due to to its story always changing visions, writers, and intentions, J.J. Abrams getting everything from unjustified hate to death threats, John Boyega being sidelined and getting death threats, Kelly Marie Tran, Naomi Ackie, Daisy Ridley, Oscar Isaac, Adam Driver, and Domhnall Gleeson, and all the other actors being targeted by people who blame them for the writing of the films and getting way too much hate and criticism thrown their way, the media and bloggers hyping up the JJ versus Ryan versus Colin director war that drags in all of the fans, a fandom split into pieces even among fans of the sequel trilogy, and I can't help but think this all could have been avoided if Disney just committed to one vision for the sequel trilogy and gave the creators enough time to make it. Real talk, I would have rather had J.J. Abrams do the entire sequel trilogy himself while taking notes on the story from George Lucas. That way, J.J. and whatever co-writer he wanted to work with could deliver a consistent trilogy for better or worse. Meanwhile, Colin Trevorrow and Rian Johnson could work on their own anthology films and not have to worry about conflicting visions or this whole director versus director war. OT fans love the original trilogy. PT fans love the prequel trilogy. Filoni fans love Rebels and the Clone Wars and basically anything with his name on it because it's all consistent with its own story with its own vision. But sequel trilogy fans have so many different factions and very few of them all love the sequel trilogy, and you can't even blame them because this is what happens when you introduce so many different visions and narratives into one story. All I'm saying is this: love or hate the sequels, what the films needed, not just for their own sake, but for the sake of the fans of the trilogy and the people working on them, was consistency, was a plan. And that's all JJ was saying from his interview about how he wished these films had a plan, because he knows how it affected everyone who worked in the trilogy, everyone who is fans of the sequel trilogy. Love or hate JJ Abrams, I would have rather at least see him do the sequel trilogy with one vision and one narrative behind him, because at the very least it would have been one story, and like any story it would have had its fans and it would have had its critics, but it would have been a consistent story, and that's what the sequel trilogy needed more than anything. Well, my friends, it looks like our time is at an end. Thank you for stopping by the channel. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, how about you smash that like button if you want to see more videos from me, subscribe to the channel to see more. What do you guys think? Are you content with the way things turned out for the sequel trilogy, or would you have preferred one consistent vision from J.J. Abrams while Colin Trevorrow and Rian Johnson were able to do their own spin-offs with just one narrative and no conflicting anything? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you for the next video. Stay safe, stay healthy, and may the force be with you, always.